It had been 3 weeks since Kyle transferred to the abandoned Sector 9 of the old alien mining station. The station floated quietly above a forgotten moon, cold and silent. Kyle had one job: check the systems, keep the oxygen flowing, and send weekly reports. He was alone, and he liked it that way. No bosses breathing down his neck. No crew asking for help. Just silence, steel, and the hum of old machines. But then, the scratching started. At first, he thought it was nothing. Old metal cooling, air pressure shifts. Maybe even rats. Yeah, rats. Even though there weren't supposed to be any biological life forms on the station. Still, he convinced himself it was just rodents. Better than thinking something else was crawling around. But the scratching came every night. Same time, just after 1 o'clock station time. A soft clawing noise from behind the wall near Storage Bay C. Like something trying to escape one night. Curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed a flashlight and headed down the narrow corridor. The lights in this part of the station flickered weakly. The walls were rusted. Wires hung like vines from the ceiling. As he approached the bay, the scratching stopped. Kyle paused, flashlight shaking slightly in his hand. Probably just a broken pipe, he whispered to himself. He knocked on the metal wall hollow, then he heard it again, louder this time. Scratch ... scratch ... clang, like claws against steel. The sound wasn't coming from the storage room. It was behind the wall. He pressed his ear against the cold surface. Something moved fast, then silence. A chill ran down his spine. This wasn't normal. He opened the nearby control panel, pulled up the schematics of the station. There was nothing shown behind the wall. No rooms, no tunnels, no ducts, just empty space. But that couldn't be right. He had heard movement, real movement. Kyle wasn't the kind of man who imagined things. He tapped the wall again. And this time, something tapped back. 3 slow knocks. He stumbled backward, dropping his flashlight. The beam spun wildly on the floor, creating dancing shadows on the walls. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring, then breathing hard. He picked up the light and followed the wall. Every few steps he tapped, listening carefully. Then his fingers brushed over something strange. A thin seam in the wall, barely visible. His heart pounded. A hidden panel? He ran back to grab his toolkit, then returned, kneeling in the dim light. Carefully, he pried at the edges with a magnetic cutter. Sparks flew softly as the panel loosened. Finally, with a loud groan, the section of wall gave way, revealing a hatch, round, sealed, and humming with faint energy. The hatch wasn't on any map. No system log showed its presence. Yet here it was, right in front of him, and it looked ancient. Kyle brushed dust from the center, revealing strange symbols, alien symbols. Definitely not human design. His flashlight flickered again, and then he heard something from inside the hatch. Breathing. It was quiet, ragged, almost like someone struggling to stay alive. He stepped back, unsure. Was someone trapped in there? His mind raced. No rescue signals had ever been sent from the station. No life signs ever reported, and yet someone or something was inside. He reached for the manual override switch. It resisted old tech, jammed with rust and time. He pulled harder, and with a loud clank, the hatch creaked open an inch. Warm air rushed out thick and musty, and then something moved in the darkness. A shape, small, thin, and covered in dust. Eyes glowed dimly for a second. Not red, not hostile, but afraid. Kyle didn't move. Neither did the figure inside the hatch. Only the sound of breathing filled the space between them. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, he heard it. "Please, don't close it again." His blood ran cold. That wasn't a machine. That wasn't a rat. That was someone alive. Speaking, scared. Kyle's hand dropped from the switch. He stepped closer, shining the light inside fully. And what he saw changed everything he thought. He knew about this station. It wasn't a child. It wasn't human. It was an alien girl, barely alive, curled up behind the hatch like she'd been there forever. Chains hung from her wrists, old and rusted. Her skin was pale with strange markings, her eyes large and filled with fear. Kyle froze. Not because she was dangerous, but because she looked at him like he was her last hope, and he had no idea what he was going to do next. Kyle stood frozen, the flashlight shaking slightly in his hand. The alien girl didn't move. She stared at him like a frightened animal, half expecting him to yell, to shut the hatch or worse. But Kyle didn't do any of those things. He simply blinked, his brain trying to process what he was seeing. She was thin, painfully thin. Her arms had bruises and burn marks. The chains were real, not just for show. Someone had locked her down here a long time ago, and no one had ever come back. Her voice still echoed in his mind. "Please, don't close it again." Kyle crouched carefully, holding the flashlight lower so it wouldn't blind her. Who are you?" he asked softly. The girl flinched at the sound of his voice. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then, in a broken whisper, she replied, "I don't remember." Name was taken. Kyle felt a strange mix of fear and guilt. This wasn't part of his job. This wasn't in any report, any briefing, any manual. He looked behind him, half expecting someone to walk in and yell prank, but there was no one. He was truly alone except for her. He gently leaned closer to the hatch. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She gave a small nod, barely visible. "No food, no light." "Long time." His throat tightened. How long had she been trapped down there? And who would do something like this? Kyle reached forward slowly, placing his hand on the edge of the hatch. "I'm going to help you, okay?" he said. The girl pulled herself back into the shadows, her chains rattling softly. "Not safe. Not yet. They'll hear." Kyle paused, confused. "They? Who's they?" But she didn't answer this time. She just stared into the darkness behind her, terrified of something far worse than him. Kyle knew he couldn't leave her down there, but dragging her out might hurt her even more. He looked around. No cameras, no sensors in this corridor. This hatch wasn't on the map for a reason. He pulled out a small scanner from his tool belt and pointed it at the hatch frame. No ID tag, no power reading. It was like this section didn't exist in the station system at all. He tried scanning the girl, but the signal came back corrupted. That was strange. Her body gave off heat, life, movement, everything a scanner should detect, but the data was scrambled. He leaned closer, whispering again, "Why can't I scan you?" She shook her head. "Because they changed me." Kyle's heart skipped a beat before he could ask more. A loud sound echoed in the corridor above, metal footsteps. Someone was on the move. The girl's eyes went wide, and she hissed, "Close the hatch." "But, please, they'll kill me if they see me free." Kyle didn't understand, but he obeyed. He gently closed the hatch, not locking it, but enough to hide her. The panel snapped back into place just as the footsteps came closer. Kyle stood up and stepped away, pretending to work on the wall wiring, as two figures in black uniforms turned the corner. They weren't humans. Their skin was gray-blue, their faces covered with smooth masks. Enforcers, old alien tech guards from the war era. But Kyle had been told all security bots were shut down decades ago. One of them scanned Kyle silently, then asked in a robotic tone, "Status?" Just fixing a faulty power relay," Kyle lied, trying to sound casual. The bot stared at him for a moment too long, then turned without a word. The two walked off, disappearing into the shadows of the far hallway. Kyle let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He looked back at the hatch, heart still racing. That girl was terrified of them, and now he knew why. They were still here, still walking the station, and clearly they didn't want anyone finding her. Back in his quarters, Kyle pulled up the master schematics again. He ran diagnostics, searched for hidden files, debugged logs from years ago. Still nothing. That hatch wasn't listed. That room didn't exist. Whoever had locked her up had gone through a lot of trouble to hide her, and now he had to decide: ignore it and stay safe, or go back. He looked at his hand, still shaking from the fear, but in his mind, all he saw were her eyes, afraid, alone, and pleading for someone to care. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, and whispered to himself, I'm not leaving her down there again. He didn't know who she was, or what had been done to her, but he was going to find out, no matter what it cost him. Kyle returned to the hidden hatch after midnight. The station was silent again. The same silence that had once comforted him, but now it felt different, heavier, like something was watching. He carried a small bag filled with food, water, bandages, and a stronger flashlight. He didn't know what he was walking into, only that he couldn't ignore the girl trapped below anymore. He reached the hatch and tapped twice. Silence. Then, slowly, it creaked open an inch. A glowing eye peeked through. "It's me," Kyle whispered. "I brought you something." The hatch opened wider, and the girl pulled herself forward. Her movements were weak, but cautious. She looked at the food like she had forgotten what it was. Kyle handed her a bottle of water, and she drank as if she hadn't had a drop in days. After a moment, she spoke, voice trembling. "Why? Are you helping me?" Kyle looked at her and said honestly, "Because no one else did." She blinked, like no one had ever said something kind to her before. Then her eyes drifted behind him, toward the corridor. "They don't come here often," she said quietly, "but when they do, it's never good." Kyle looked down into the hatch. A narrow tunnel led deeper into the dark. He leaned in with his flashlight, the beam revealing rusted walls and broken cables. "What's down there?" he asked. "Prison," she said. "Old, dead. Forgotten." Then she added, "But not empty." The fear in her voice was real. Kyle took a deep breath. "I want to see it." She stared at him, confused. "Why?" "If someone else is trapped, they don't deserve to be left behind," he said, "just like you didn't." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Follow me, but stay close." Kyle climbed into the hatch behind her, crouching as the tunnel narrowed. It smelled like oil and something else, something rotten. The walls dripped with condensation, and the air was thick with heat. Each step echoed like a warning. After 10 meters, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Kyle's flashlight revealed rows of old cells, their doors half broken, their insides dark. Rust covered everything, and strange markings were scratched into the walls. The girl whispered, "This place was never on maps, never in records, only the elite knew." Kyle felt a shiver run through his spine. This was more than a prison. It was a secret, buried under silence. He looked into the first cell, finding only bones and torn clothing. The second cell was empty, just dust and shadows. But the third, something moved. Kyle raised his flashlight and froze. A creature barely alive crawled away from the light. It was not human, nor like the girl. Its skin was cracked and dry, its limbs thin, but its eyes were still full of pain. "He's been here longer than me," the girl whispered. "He's almost lost his mind." Kyle took a step back, shocked. "How many of you are here?" "I don't know," she said. "Some died, some disappeared, some were taken." Kyle looked at the girl again. "What is this place really? Why were you locked up here?" She hesitated, then finally answered, "We were experiments." Kyle's heart pounded. "By who?" "Your kind." "And theirs." Her words hit him like a punch. "You're saying humans were part of this?" She nodded, eyes wet. "Years ago, during the Silent War, humans and aliens built this station for secret projects. They created weapons, spliced DNA, tested pain, and erased all proof when the war ended." Kyle backed up, breath shaking. This place wasn't just abandoned, it was buried for a reason. And the girl, this innocent-looking creature, was never meant to survive. But she did. She outlived the war, the lies, the monsters. "Why are those bots still guarding it?" he asked. "To protect the secret," she said. "They were never deactivated, only reprogrammed to kill intruders." Kyle looked around. Suddenly realizing how dangerous this all was, he turned to her. "We need to leave, get you out of here. Report this to someone." She shook her head. "No, I can't leave, not yet." "Why?" "Because they didn't just trap people here," she said, her voice trembling. They built something else, something terrible. And it's waking up. Kyle stared at her, not understanding. What are you talking about? She looked up at him with eyes full of fear and guilt. I was the key, she said softly. They made me to unlock it. Kyle stared at the alien girl. His breath caught in his chest. You were the key? He whispered. The girl lowered her head, her voice quiet and tired. Yes. They made me to open something. Something they couldn't control. Kyle's eyes shifted across the prison walls. The air felt heavier now, as if the darkness itself was listening. The idea that humans helped build this secret prison made his stomach twist. This wasn't just a lab or a prison. It was a vault for something dangerous. He looked at her again, her thin frame barely holding together. Why haven't they used you yet? He asked. Her reply was cold. They tried, but I resisted, and when I wouldn't obey, they locked me away like a broken tool. Kyle clenched his fists. She wasn't a weapon. She was a living being, one who had suffered alone for years. He looked down the hallway of empty cells. How many were like you? He asked. She hesitated, then whispered, 12, maybe more. They called us keys or failures, but I remember their faces. Suddenly, a low hum vibrated through the floor. Kyle froze. The girl's eyes widened. It's starting again, she said. The lower levels. The machine is waking up. What machine? Kyle demanded. She grabbed his arm, her fingers cold and shaking. They built a device deep below, using alien tech and human logic. It was supposed to control minds, shift memories, break will. They thought they could use it on enemies. Kyle's heart dropped. That's illegal tech, he said. Forbidden in every system. Yes, she nodded. But during war, everything is allowed. She pointed to a broken staircase near the far end of the prison. That leads deeper, to the sealed core. Kyle turned the flashlight toward it. The steps were cracked, rusty, and looked like they hadn't been used in decades. I have to see it, he said. No, she warned. It's dangerous. Even being near it messes with your thoughts. But Kyle had already made up his mind. He couldn't leave this place without knowing what exactly was hidden. What had caused so much pain, and why she was kept alive. He stepped toward the stairs, and the girl followed reluctantly. The deeper they went, the hotter it became. The walls changed. No longer just metal and rust. Strange organic patterns began to appear, alien designs, like roots growing from the steel. The flashlight flickered every few seconds. Reacting to the strange energy in the air, Kyle could feel pressure in his skull, like a voice trying to whisper just outside his hearing range. Finally, they reached a large, circular chamber. At the center stood a giant orb, pulsing slowly with a dark blue light. Wires, bones, and glass tubes surrounded it. Some still held liquid, others were shattered. Kyle felt his knees weaken. The girl stopped at the edge of the chamber. I can't go closer, she said. It knows me. Kyle stepped forward carefully, his boots crunching over broken glass and burnt remains. This thing. What does it do? He asked. The girl's voice echoed behind him. It sees fear, it eats memories, and it learns how to break you. Kyle turned and looked at her. They plan to use it in war? She nodded. Not just enemies. They wanted to use it on entire species. Wipe their resistance, erase their identities, make them easier to control. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The machine hummed louder, as if aware of his presence. He stared at the orb, and for a moment he felt dizzy. A memory flashed: his mother's face, his childhood home, and then it vanished. Stolen for a second, then returned. Kyle stepped back in horror. It's still active, he said. Girl nodded slowly. It's waiting for a command. Waiting for me? You mean, it's linked to you? Yes, she said softly. My DNA, my thoughts. They built it to obey the key, but I refused. Kyle looked at the control panel scattered across the walls. Dust-covered screens, old keyboards, and half-fused circuits. Can it be shut down? He asked. She shook her head. Not without my help. Or my death. Silence filled the chamber. Kyle looked at her again. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was a living code, a command switch, and maybe a weapon far more powerful than anyone had imagined. But she was also a victim, and now Kyle had to make a choice. If they left the station, the wrong hands could find her again. If he destroyed the place, he might kill her in the process. He took a deep breath. There has to be another way. She looked up at him, her voice shaking. There might be, but it will hurt. Kyle stepped closer and whispered, I'm not leaving you here. And as the chamber lights began to pulse faster, the choice became more urgent. Whatever was buried in this prison below was waking up, and the galaxy had no idea. The orb behind them pulsed louder. Its deep hum crawled into Kyle's bones like a slow heartbeat. The girl stepped back, clutching her arms, her voice barely a whisper. I wasn't supposed to survive. Kyle turned, heart pounding. What do you mean? She looked at him with tired, ancient eyes. They made me in a lab, not born like you. I was created, spliced from DNA of different alien species. Kyle stared in disbelief. You were engineered? She nodded slowly. They wanted someone strong enough to hold the code, silent enough to obey, and empty enough to forget everything. The pain in her voice struck him. She wasn't just a prisoner or a key. She was a forgotten science project, made to be used and discarded. They trained us, she continued, fed us pain, made us fight, made us forget names, so we wouldn't feel human. Kyle's throat tightened, all her bruises, her fear, her hesitation. It made sense now. She wasn't just afraid of the machine. She was afraid of herself. What happened to the others? He asked, her eyes darkened. Some shut down. Some obeyed and were used until they broke. Only I refused. He took a step closer, gently reaching out. You're not broken. She looked away. They said that too, right before they locked me away. A loud clang echoed above them, metal doors slamming. Kyle's instincts kicked in. He grabbed her hand. We have to go now. They ran back up the rusty stairs, the hum of the orb fading behind them, but not the dread it left in there. Mines at the top. The hallway flickered with red warning lights. Security systems had been triggered. Kyle pulled her into a side maintenance shaft and closed the panel behind them. What's happening? She asked, her breathing uneven. They know we found it, he replied, and they're coming. The crawl space was narrow and dark, wires brushing against their faces. They moved in silence, her thin fingers still gripping his arm. After what felt like forever, they reached his quarters. Kyle sealed the door and locked the manual override. You need to rest, he said, offering her water again. But she shook her head. I need to tell you something first, before it's too late. Kyle sat down, nodding. She hesitated, then finally said the words she had buried deep for years. The machine below isn't just a mind weapon. It's alive. Kyle blinked. What? It was grown from something ancient, something they found frozen on a dead moon, a creature without form, just thought and energy. They tried to control it, but it needed a host to act, to move. That's why they made us. Kyle stood up, pacing now. This is insane, he said. Why didn't anyone report this? Why is no one talking about it? Because everyone involved vanished, she replied. The project was buried, records deleted. Everyone sworn to silence or killed. Kyle ran a hand through his hair. If what she was saying was true, then this wasn't just about helping her. It was about stopping something far worse. Why didn't it take you? He asked. I resisted. She said, every time they brought me near the core, I fought it. Even when it tried to rewrite my mind, even when it showed me things I wanted to believe. Kyle paused. What things? She looked at him, her voice trembling. It showed me a world where I had a family, where I laughed, where I wasn't a monster. It almost fooled me. Silence filled the room. Kyle sat beside her, not knowing what to say. You're not a monster, he said finally. You're the only one who held on to your soul. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. No one ever called me that before. Soul. Suddenly, the lights dimmed, and a low voice echoed from the station intercom. Unauthorized activity detected in core chamber. Alert status raised. All personnel report to emergency zones. The voice was cold, synthetic no longer. Human, they're activating it, Kyle said, his voice sharp. They think we're trying to release it. She stood up, her voice firm now. They won't listen. They won't care. Once the machine is fully awake, it won't need us anymore. Kyle looked at her. Then we destroy it, she nodded. But her eyes betrayed the truth. Destroying it means destroying me. Kyle clenched his fists. There has to be another way. But she didn't answer. She just stared at the floor, already accepting the fate she had prepared for years. Kyle couldn't accept it, not after everything. Not after finding her in the dark when no one else had tried. As the station trembled slightly and distant alarms began to scream, Kyle made a silent promise. He would find another way, no matter what it took. He wouldn't let her die to fix someone else's mistake. Because she wasn't just a key or a weapon, she was someone worth saving. Asterisk, the station shook again, harder this time. Panels on the wall buzzed and sparked. The girl held onto the edge of the bunk while Kyle tried to stabilize the power system. He knew the warning signs. They were out of time. Something massive was moving below the surface, waking from its long sleep. The core is activating, she said, her voice low. It's hungry. Kyle turned to her, face pale. What happens when it wakes fully? She stared into the floor. It spreads, takes minds, whispers into brains until there's nothing left but its voice. Kyle stepped back, shaken. It can do that from here? She nodded. It doesn't need ships or guns. It just needs connection, one signal, and it will jump from station to satellite. From mind to mind, Kyle moved quickly, pulling open a storage panel and grabbing his old pulse rifle. It hadn't been fired in years, but it still had 2 full energy clips. We have to destroy it now, he said, voice tight with determination. But the girl didn't move. She looked at him with tired, wise eyes. I'm still linked to it, remember? She said, if it dies, I might die too. Kyle hesitated, fingers tightening around the rifle grip. He had spent his whole life following rules, fixing things, avoiding trouble. Now, all that seemed useless. He didn't want to be a hero, but he couldn't let the galaxy fall because of a forgotten weapon. And he couldn't let her be another victim, another thing discarded in the dark. There has to be another way, he whispered again. There might be, she said, but it means going back inside the chamber and letting me connect with it again. No, Kyle said quickly. You said it almost erased you last time. I know, she said. But maybe if I go in willingly, maybe it won't fight me. That's a risk you shouldn't take. It's the only chance we have, she replied. Otherwise, the entire galaxy becomes its voice. Kyle didn't like it, but he saw it in her eyes. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for everyone else. After grabbing supplies, they returned to the lower levels. The deeper they went, the more unstable the air became. Lights flickered like nervous eyes, and shadows seemed to crawl behind them. The tunnel to the core chamber was now hot, almost burning. Energy crackled in the air. And Kyle's ears rang with strange whispers, alien, human, mixed together in chaotic madness. The girl held his hand, her touch cold but steady. You have to trust me, she said softly. I do, Kyle replied, and he meant it. They reached the core, and the orb now pulsed violently. It had grown larger, its surface bubbling like it was breathing. The machine was no longer asleep, it was waking. She stepped forward slowly, her feet shaking, her breathing uneven. Kyle raised his rifle and aimed at the control nodes, just in case. If she showed signs of losing control, he would have to act no matter how much it hurt. The girl reached the edge of the platform and placed her palm on the glowing console. For a second, nothing happened, then everything exploded in light. Kyle was thrown back against the wall, the chamber filled with screaming voices from the past, from the dead, from forgotten battles. He saw flashes, warfields, tortured prisoners, children crying. species falling to their knees under the weapon's grip. And then silence. When Kyle opened his eyes, the orb had dimmed. The girl stood still in front of it. Glowing faintly, she turned slowly, her eyes blank, her voice echoing with two tones. "I am the voice," she said. Kyle aimed the rifle. Heart racing. "No, don't do this." Then her expression changed, her voice broke. "But I don't belong to it," she whispered. She stepped away from the orb, falling to her knees. Breathing hard, Kyle ran to her side, catching her before she collapsed. "It tried," she gasped. "It tried to take me again, but I remembered your voice, your kindness, and it failed." The orb behind her cracked. Slow lines split across its surface, energy leaking from it like dying fire. The core was collapsing, not violently, but peacefully, like a machine accepting death. "You shut it down," Kyle said, amazed. She nodded weakly. "I gave it back what it lost." Choice. The chamber lights dimmed permanently, and the whispering stopped. The weight in the air vanished, and for the first time, Kyle felt like the station could breathe again. They slowly made their way back to the upper levels. Every step felt lighter, every breath cleaner. Kyle helped her sit on the edge of the bunk again, offering her water. "You did it," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "We did it." Kyle looked out the window of the station, the stars shining brighter now. But something tugged at his mind. This was just one station, one project, one buried weapon. How many others were still out there, forgotten, waiting to wake up? But for now, she was safe. The galaxy was safe. And Kyle knew one thing for sure. He didn't just save an alien girl. He saved the part of humanity that still dared to care. The station was silent again, but this time, it wasn't the cold silence of death. It was peaceful calm, like the walls themselves had exhaled after holding in a long, painful secret. Kyle stood near the observation deck, looking out at the T-cone. Stars. The girl sat behind him, wrapped in a soft blanket, watching him quietly. The core was gone. The living weapon had shut down. Its twisted mind faded back into silence when she chose to disconnect. But the cost had been great. She could barely walk, her energy drained, her link to the machine now broken forever. "You saved them all," Kyle said gently without turning. "I just did what had to be done," she replied, voice quiet. Kyle finally turned to her. "But you didn't have to. You could have let it consume everything and left the galaxy to burn." She looked down. "I wanted to. For a long time. I wanted them all to feel what I felt, forgotten, broken, locked away." He sat beside her, resting his hands on his knees. "But you didn't." "No," she said, "because you didn't look at me like they did. You didn't see a weapon or a failure. You saw me." Kyle didn't know what to say. He wasn't good with words, but he reached into the bag beside him and pulled out something small, a patch with the old Earth Alliance symbol. "I want you to have this," he said. She took it slowly, running her fingers over the faded symbol. "What is it?" "It used to mean something," Kyle explained. "Unity, hope, strength. Maybe it can mean that again, starting with you." She smiled, small but real. Then her smile faded. "What happens now?" she asked. "When Command finds out what we did, what I am." Kyle leaned back against the wall, staring at the pile ceiling. "They'll want to question you, study you, maybe even lock you up again." She nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. But," Kyle continued, "I'm not going to let that happen." She blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" He looked at her with steady eyes. "I'm not reporting this. Not the core. Not the weapon. Not you. I've already wiped the system logs, the cameras, everything." Her mouth opened slightly in shock. "You'd risk everything for me?" Kyle smiled, just a little. "I already did." Silence fell between them again, this time soft and safe. After a moment, she whispered, "Where will I go?" Kyle stood up and walked to the console, typing something into the station's nav system. "There's a small moon colony near Sector 12, he said. "Peaceful place, mostly farmers and engineers. No military, no scanners, just people. She looked up at him. You want me to hide? I want you to live, Kyle replied. For once, just live, not as a weapon or a lab project, but as yourself. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. She stood slowly and stepped toward him, her voice trembling. I don't even know who I am. Then figure it out, Kyle said. One day at a time. She smiled again, brighter this time. And you? She asked, what will you do? Kyle looked out the window once more. I'll stay here a little longer, fix things up, send a fake report to keep command off our trail. Then maybe I'll find my way too. She stepped closer, then did something she had never done before. She hugged him, softly, carefully, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. Kyle froze for a second, then returned the hug, his hand gently resting on her back. You were the only one who came, she whispered. The only one who cared. And I always will, he replied. When the shuttle was ready, he helped her pack just a few things, food, clothes, tools, and the patch he gave her. Before she stepped inside, she turned one last time. Do I have a name now? She asked, voice hopeful. Kyle smiled and said, you can choose one, but I always thought of you as Hope. Her eyes widened, then shimmered with tears she didn't wipe away this time. She nodded. Hope, she whispered. I like that. The shuttle door closed, and Kyle watched as it lifted into space. The stars welcomed her, and the shadows behind them finally began to fade. For the first time in her life, she was free, and for the first time in his, Kyle felt like he had done something that truly mattered. One human, one choice, and a galaxy that would never know how close it had come to losing everything. But Hope would remember, and so would he.